Following the road to serfdom, the use of knowledge in society, and the close of World War II, the early neoliberal movement finally emerged from hibernation. There were about 5 or 6 disparate groups of economists, historians, philosophers, and entrepreneurs, who now began to coalesce around the goals of defending individualism and economic liberalism from all variations of collectivism or government interventionism, whether they were capitalist or socialist. There were the British economists at the London School of Economics in Manchester, including Lionel Robbins, Arnold Plant, Karl Popper, Ronald Coase, John Jukes, Stanley Denison, and Michael Polanyi, the brother of Karl Polanyi. There were the Austrian economists who had been exiled to the US by the Nazis, including Ludwig von Mises, Gottfried Haberler, and Fritz Matschlup. There were the French philosophers who sprouted out of the colloque Walter Lippmann, including Louis Rougier, Raymond Aron, and Jacques Rueff. Back in Germany, there was a holdout of liberal academics whose association with the journal Ordo led to their nickname the Ordo Liberals. These Ordo Liberals included Walter Eucken, Franz Bohm, Alexander Rostow, and Wilhelm Röpke. Then there was the University of Chicago Economics Department, which incubated multiple generations of neoliberal economists. The foundation of the Chicago School, as it was called, was laid by Frank Knight, Henry Simons, Jacob Viner, Aaron Director, Theodore Schultz, and Lloyd Mintz. These elder academics brought up a second generation of the Chicago School, which included Milton Friedman, George Stigler, James Buchanan, Arnold Harberger, Gary Becker, Gordon Tullock, and Edward Levi. Buchanan and Tullock, along with William Riker, would go on to contribute significantly to the development of public choice theory, an important offshoot of neoliberal thinking which was based primarily in Virginia and Rochester. Outside of academia, a powerful group of American and British businessmen, entrepreneurs, and journalists who were deeply moved by the road to serfdom and vitriolically opposed to the New Deal and British welfare provided invaluable financial and ideological support to these neoliberal academics. Figures such as Albert Hunold, Leonard Read, Floyd A. Harper, Harold Luno, Henry Hazlitt, Lawrence Fertig, Lauren B. Miller, Jasper Crane, Edwin Fulner, Anthony Fisher, Ralph Harris, Arthur Selden, and Manuel Ayau each played important roles in increasing the power and prestige of neoliberal policy. They financially supported neoliberal research and conferences, erected a vast empire of free market think tanks that prolifically published neoliberal policy solutions, conducted aggressive outreach campaigns to influence the opinions of academics, politicians, and journalists, and poured accolades onto their own neoliberal allies through the establishment of their own insular network of research organizations and private universities. Hayek's writings placed him at the nexus of this new international movement, and he quickly set out to work organizing it. In 1947, Hayek convened the first ever meeting of the Mont Pelerin Society, which was meant to unite these disparate groups into an exclusive forum dedicated to the defense of individualism and economic liberty across the globe. The inaugural conference took place at the Hotel du Parc in the Swiss mountain village of Mont Pelerin from April 1st to April 10th. Funding for the conference was secured from Dr. Albert Hunold of Switzerland and Harold Luno of the United States, two of the Mont Pelerin Society's earliest allies among business conservatives. 39 participants from 10 countries made it to the meeting, including a young Milton Friedman, who had traveled to Europe for the very first time to attend, and several that had been present back at the colloque Walter Lippmann of 1938. Some of the members present at this inaugural meeting were Mises, Popper, Knight, Friedman, Stigler, Director, Read, Harper, Hazlitt, Robbins, Röpke, Eucken, Denison, Hunold, Jukes, Matschlup, Miller, and Polanyi. Though the Mont Pelerin Society framed its activism as a defense of classical liberalism, in practice, the Society set out to hone a new conception of liberalism that answered the rallying cry of the road to serfdom and fought off the state interventionist ideas of Keynes, the U.S. New Deal politics, Britain's social democracy under Clement Attlee, and the centralized state planning theories following the Marxist tradition. The term neoliberalism, which had been coined at the colloque Walter Lippmann, was preserved by the Mont Pelerin Society for having the distinct benefits of distancing itself from laissez-faire forms of capitalism and acknowledging that a strong state that protected competition would have to be won through a coherent political strategy. Of course, Hayek wasn't the only major influencer present at the inaugural conference. Along with The Road to Serfdom, two other books, Bureaucracy by Ludwig von Mises and The Open Society and Its Enemies by Karl Popper, had formed the opening salvo of neoliberal thought between 1944 and 1945. Mises made the arguments that governments were dominated by a stifling bureaucratic mindset and could never be as efficient or as innovative as private interests incentivized by the profit motive. Popper, on the other hand, criticized authors from Plato to Marx for their historicism, or their insistence that history had an inevitable destiny of revolution and utopia. But just as in the colloque Walter Lippmann, there were divergences in thought even between these early neoliberal writers, with Hayek and Mises again forming the core of the most market-centric variation of neoliberalism possible. While Hayek and Mises were in firm agreement about the superiority of free markets and the dangers of socialism, Popper was more skeptical of free markets and open to creating a unified front with socialists under what he called a larger humanitarian camp. These leftish views were not tolerated in the Mont Pelerin Society for long. Mises is famously remembered for standing up during a discussion on progressive income taxes and exclaiming, "You're all a bunch of socialists." Popper was among the very first neoliberals in history, but after the Open Society, his influence soon waned compared to Hayek and Mises. At the first meeting of the Mont Pelerin Society, the group was tasked with approving a statement of aims that would affirm their common convictions on which the work of the organization would be based. Though it went through multiple drafts plagued by controversy and bickering within the group, it was Lionel Robbins who, in the end, produced the final draft of the Mont Pelerin Society's statement of aims, which reads like so. The central values of civilization are in danger. Over large stretches of the Earth's surface, the essential conditions of human dignity and freedom have already disappeared. In others, they are under constant menace from the development of current tendencies of policy. The position of the individual and the voluntary group are progressively undermined by extensions of arbitrary power. Even that most precious possession of Western man, freedom of thought and expression, is threatened by the spread of creeds which, claiming the privilege of tolerance when in the position of a minority, seek only to establish a position of power in which they can suppress and obliterate all views but their own. The group holds that these developments have been fostered by the growth of a view of history which denies all absolute moral standards, and by the growth of theories which question the desirability of the rule of law. It holds further that they have been fostered by a decline of belief in private property and the competitive market, for without the diffused power and initiative associated with these institutions, it is difficult to imagine a society in which freedom may be effectively preserved. The group does not aspire to conduct propaganda. It seeks to establish no meticulous and hampering orthodoxy. It aligns itself with no particular party. Its object is solely, by facilitating the exchange of views among minds inspired by certain ideals and broad conceptions held in common, to contribute to the preservation and improvement of the free society. The first conference proved a success, and the Mont Pelerin Society was formally registered as a non-profit corporation in November 1947. With the formation of the Mont Pelerin Society, Hayek became the intellectual center of a global network of individuals dedicated to creating neoliberal reforms everywhere. The Society agreed to meet again in 2 years, and the Mont Pelerin Society still meets